Hi, I'm Jeff. This is Tropical Plants at 53 degrees north, and today I'm going to talk to you about free orchids. I'm talking, of course, about keikis. Now, there's loads out there on the internet about keikis and about orchids, producing them, what to do with them, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to give you my spin on it. I've found loads of questions that seem to be cropping up over the interwebs, and I thought I'd do my best to try and answer some of them, and of course give you my own particular view on these things and show you the story of my orchids and my experience with keikis. So before we jump in, I thought I'd just show you this Streptocarpus Crystal Ice. Now, I've found that Streptocarpus Crystal Ice is quite slow throughout the year. It's supposedly one of these that lasts all through the year, but it really comes into its own about this time of year, and I find it has more of a rest towards spring and summertime, even though it does produce flowers, but not this kind of mass blooming that you get in November. So let's jump in. And we are in. Okay, so keikis. So first thing to get out of the way, it's keiki, it's not keiki. And you know, I'm one of these people that I kind of use both of those words if I've heard it a few times dotted about the place. And if you go to the North of England Orchid Society, loads of people call them keikis. However, I believe it's keiki, and it's a Hawaiian word, and it means babies or child or offspring or children, that kind of thing. So let's start off by going through one or two of my experiences with keikis, and then we'll get up to having a look at one and detaching it and potting it up. So over here I've got one of the orchids that's most prone to keikis, and it is a dendrobium. Dendrobiums, Phalaenopsis, Epidendrons, those kind of orchids are usually the ones that produce keikis, but I believe any orchid can produce a keiki. And we'll go through some of the questions that I found and see if we can come up with some answers. Well, first of all, we're looking at my Dendrobium Stardust Firebird. So this is it over here. It lives in the warm side now, and I'll tell you why. Now, I did a video on this back in, let's just see if I can pop it down somewhere while I chat to you about this. I did a video on this back in, I think it was March time, and it was a repotting video, and it looked absolutely spectacular in as much as it looked very, very healthy, and it had lots and lots of really good roots on it and loads of good leaves on all these canes, nice deep green colour, no markings on them. And look at it now, oh dear, something dreadful happened to it after March, and I don't know what it is. So I repotted it in March because that was when really I was available to do the repots before I started the gardening season, and it had all these nice canes with lots and lots of nubbins on them, I thought, ready to bloom. And one by one the leaves all fell off, turned yellow, fell off, and it started to produce these what can only be described as keikis. Now, I've seen Roger's videos on this one, and I think he called his the keiki machine, and I'm not so sure whether it went the way of Under the Hedge, and this may well be joining it under my hedge rather than Roger's hedge. However, I'm not going to give up, not just yet anyway. I'm going to wait it out. As I say, it was over in the cooler side, and it was doing fine. It was going down to 12 degrees Celsius, so I have no idea what happened to it. I really should at some point get in there and have a look at the roots and see what the roots are doing now. I very, very rarely water it because there's no growth on it, you know, and it's really nothing to support with the water. It's just really, I think, on its way out. And that's one of the reasons why orchids produce keikis. If they cannot do their usual sexual reproduction with the pollen and so on, and then they will produce keikis. I believe when they are stressed, then they're more likely to produce keikis, and this would really attest to that, wouldn't it? Because if you look at this one, every growth on there is about to be a keiki, but none of them will be removed as of yet because the roots are very, very small and there's just not enough growth on there yet. So I very rarely show that for obvious reasons, but I'm not going to give up on it. I have no idea what happened to it and why it suddenly decided to drop everything. That's the story of Dendrobium Stardust Firebird. Now, if I just take you through to the warmer side, over here we have my Dendrobium nobilis star class Apollon, still chucking a few blooms out, although it's in its winter rest now. I've not watered it this month, and I'm not going to water it much anyway until about February time, and it starts to produce its nubbins on the new canes that we've got there. I mean, it was slug damaged quite recently. One of the new canes was bitten off, unfortunately. Can't see which one it was. I think it was down there somewhere. You can just see down there I'm pointing to. The new growth there was completely decimated by a slug, which I did catch and launched it over the fence. So when I bought this was purchased at an Orchid Society auction, and it was covered in keikis, absolutely loads of them. And I have to say that since it's been over here in my care, and obviously I've managed to get it to the kind of care that it likes. It did that really big mass blooming that I did a video on, quite a short video on a while back. Since that happened, since it's been growing nicely for me, it's not produced one other keiki, nothing. Now those original keikis I did pot up. I've got a couple of them here. Not looking, well, they're not keikis anymore because they bloom. So that was one of the questions: how long does it take for a keiki to bloom? And in my case, with this star class Apollon, it bloomed the very same season. So that shows that they don't always take a few years, but the general advice is that they can take a couple of years before they bloom. It depends how big they are. These, I think, had been on the plant for quite a long time. So why do orchids produce keikis? Usually when they're stressed. How do you know if it is because they are stressed or they're just producing it anyway? Because they can just produce them anyway. Well, I found a little bit of information that said if they produce a keiki when they are in bloom, then that is an indication that it's because the plant is stressed. It might be too much sunlight, it might be not enough sunlight, it could be the watering, it could be the media. There's all sorts of different factors. It could be the temperature that's causing it to be stressed, and in which case it will then chuck out some blooms, chuck out some keikis. It's doing everything it can to make sure that it will reproduce itself. So what is a keiki? Well, a keiki is actually just a plantlet, a baby plant, which is an actual clone of the parent plant. It's genetically identical, so you're going to know what you're going to get from it, you know, as opposed to a plant that's been pollinated by insects and it's come from pollen from another plant. Then the resulting offspring from that is going to be a mixture of the genetic material, so it might not actually look exactly the same as the one that you've got, but in this case you know it's going to be exactly the same, like this one down here. And while we're on the subject of keikis, this one here, which has got a couple of nice new growths on it, and you can, don't know if you can just about see, there are a couple of kind of very early stages of nubbins coming. I mean, it is only November. There's a couple of buds under there that are about to come. If anybody remembers my video on the star class Apollon, I'll put a link up there somewhere, or a little picture of it, or even I might even put a little bit of the video up on there so you can see what it looked like. The only reason that I'm going to cut off a keiki today is because they're useful for doing swaps. So if anybody wants this one and would like to swap it with something similar or any kind of orchid that I've not got, then please do drop me an email or stick it in the comments. I'd be very, very interested to see if anybody wants to do that. I did put it on a Facebook group, but nobody wanted it. I don't know why, because yeah, okay, it's got a few blackened spots on the leaves there, but it did look really, really good in its heyday this season, and that's obviously why I've kept it. So it's a nice one to give a mass blooming. It looked absolutely spectacular, even though when you look at the blooms now on their own they don't look very good, but when you get the whole thing blooming they look fantastic. Okay, so I'm just going to move this Dendrobium out the way here, because you'll be able to see then where the keiki is that we're talking about. So this is the very common and very popular Dendrobium Berry Oda, and I'm really happy to say it's going to bloom this season. It's second blooming for me. You can see the new growth coming down there on each of these canes. They're not on every one, but I'm sure they'll come at some point. So I have a keiki on this one, and I'll just see if we can get up to it. So here it is, sticking out there, protruding above all the other canes, and you can see the roots down there. There aren't a great deal of root, to be honest, and I think if the advice is to be followed properly, then I wouldn't cut this off just yet, but I'm going to. And the reason for that is that I really don't like the look of keikis on a plant. And you can see why. I mean, it's like a plant growing on top of a plant, or a cane growing on top of a cane. I am going to pot it up, and I'm just going to take a risk. If it dies, well, it dies. There's nothing lost. I'm not really that bothered. It will probably take a couple of years to bloom, but again, it's such a beautiful orchid when it's in bloom. And again, I'll put a little clip up of what this looked like when it was in bloom. That someone might want to swap me a keiki of Dendrobium Berry Oda with a similar sized keiki of a plant that I don't have. So again, drop me a line if you're interested in doing that. Okay, so before I remove this, I'm going to answer some more of the questions that I found and see if I can come up with something slightly different to what everybody else has put. And by the way, if you are a very experienced grower and you know more than I do about keikis, which is highly possible, then please do put in the comments anything extra to add, if you've got anything extra to add or any corrections to make. I love hearing from people. So when do we get rid of keikis? Well, the answer is you can get rid of them at any time. Just use them as an indication that there could be something wrong with your culture. There could be. I don't think there is in this particular case. I'm pretty confident that this is a healthy plant. It's just prone to them. And as I say, you can see that there's already new buds, growths coming on it. It is going to bloom for me, so I'm quite happy that that's a happy plant. And I can look down at its roots. It's grown lots of new canes for me this year after the last blooming, and all those roots look nice and healthy, and you can see there they're even peeking through at the bottom. So that isn't a stressed plant. That is simply a plant that's decided it wants to produce another of itself. As I say, pretty prone to them anyway. So when do we remove them? We remove them when we think they look like they've got enough roots. The longer you can leave it on, the better. But in my case, I'm going to remove this. It has got roots, so I'm going to give it a go. Why not? Should they be removed? Well, the answer to that is it's up to you. If you like the look of the plant with the keikis on, then by all means leave them. If you like the look of the plant without it, which is in my case, I much prefer them without the keikis all over them, so I'm going to remove it. So it's entirely up to you. Another question, can you actually make your plant produce keikis? Well, you've got two options. You can either stress it, in which case, yes, it probably will produce a keiki if you stress it, but you may well then go and kill it. The other answer to that is you can use something called keiki paste, which I believe you can buy online. And all it is really is something with some hormones in it that you would rub on the side somewhere on one of the canes, usually where one of the nodes is, and it will then produce, or should produce, a little keiki for you. Now, I've seen some pretty horrific looking plants that said keiki paste on them that just really look like they've been attacked by Dr. Frankenstein. Was it Dr. Frankenstein? They look just way too mutated, and it didn't really do the best thing for them. Wasn't the best thing for them. So it's up to you. I mean, for me anyway, if you wait long enough, sooner or later you're going to get some keikis, especially if you've got dendrobiums around the place. So how do you remove them? Well, we'll move over to the warm side of the greenhouse and let's get rid of this one and pot it up. Okay, so it's not rocket science this. Couple of methods you can do. I prefer to just twist it and pull it if I can. So there it is, and if I can just get my fingers in there, I'm trying to look at through the viewfinder as well at the same time, which isn't an easy thing to do. That's in the way, isn't it? So what I'm going to do is just try and twist it off. nearly done. There we go. Right. Now, where it was attached just there to the parent plant, the advice is to treat it with some fungicide. Now, I've got some fungicide in a spray bottle, so I'm going to spray it with some fungicide, and I'm also going to do the same to the parent plant there. I'm not usually great with plant hygiene, to be honest, but I don't really want to lose this one off the leaf there, so I am going to do it this time. I believe you can use cinnamon as well. There's one or two other things you can use. So it's got lots of roots on it. Again, advice is that these are aerial roots, so you're probably better to put it in a medium that is quite airy and free draining. If you go and put it into something like sphagnum moss, then it's likely that these roots are going to die off. I wouldn't do that anyway with something like a dendrobium in my particular environment. There's a tiny little bit of moss in there, but not so much. This is really packed tightly. Dendrobiums don't really like to be in a pot with lots and lots of space. So I've got a small pot, really small, as small as I can get my hands on. I might put some holes in it later to give it a little bit more and it's simply going to be potted up with some bark into that one there. I'll obviously going to go and spray it first, and that's it really. I'm not going to show you any more of that. It's very straightforward, very simple. I'm going to label it, put a date on it, and that'll be ready to do a little bit of growing over the winter and ready for a swap for somebody who's interested in their own Dendrobium Berry Oda. So quite a short one today, but I just wanted to do my spin on the keiki thing, seeing as I had a keiki to pot up. And as I say, if you're really interested in doing some swaps, then please get in touch, and if you've got some extra information to add about keikis that I don't know about and that's not been in my video, then please do put that in the comments, and for now I'll see you on the next one. Bye.